Travel back in time with a trip inside the Iowa's News Now vault.
WMT-TV is on the air. This is WMT-TV in Cedar Rapids, the first station in the United States to go on the air with maximum power of 100,000 watts.
On the night of February 12, 1959, Marlene was arrested.
Take it away in full spectrum color.
Well, Doug, first I'd like to say this. All you guys and gals, take it easy, play it safe, and be careful. Will you do that? And I'm
Thank you for making Channel 2 your choice for news.
Channel 2 celebrates 40 years together. This program is brought to you in part by Yonkers and Perpetual Savings Bank. Here is your host, Dave Shea.
Good evening. Most parents, middle-aged and over, have probably heard their children say, "You mean there was no television when you were growing up?" 40 years ago, in 1953, in many parts of the nation, there was no television. There was no television station in this part of eastern Iowa until WMT-TV started broadcasting on Channel 2 on September 30th of 1953. During the next 2 hours, we'll look back at local television over the last 4 decades. We'll show you some people and programs you may have grown up with. Some you'll surely remember, some you may have forgotten. You'll see how television has changed in some ways, but stayed the same in others. We'll laugh at a few of the bloopers, some that made the air, some that didn't. We'll bring back some memories and most definitely have some fun in the next 2 hours, and I think you'll enjoy it. Here's 40 years on Channel 2. In fact, we'll go back even farther, to the late 1940s, when television started in the largest cities and began spreading across the country. But in 1948, the Federal Communications Commission realized that if it granted a license to everyone who applied, there would be mass interference in the major cities and probably no stations in sparsely populated areas. So it froze everything while it decided what to do. WOI in Ames and WOC in Davenport got their licenses before the freeze. WOI was the first Iowa station in the air, signing on in 1949, and WOC began broadcasting in 1950. The FCC studied the license allocation problem for 5 long years and finally unfroze the licensing process in 1953. WMT got its license in March of that year, and manager Bill Corton went all out to make sure that we would be this area's first station on the air. While WMT Radio was located downtown, more space was needed for television, and a site for a new building was found in then rural northeast Cedar Rapids. We're looking south here down C Avenue. This is before the Collins buildings were built and before there was even a street going west on what is now Collins Road. Corton named the WMT property Broadcast Park. He discovered television was a more expensive proposition than radio. He also discovered that some other people thought TV might just be a passing fancy that would never succeed financially.
We had saved up. We had quite a little pot saved up, but not enough. So I went to my banker here to try to get an extra $300,000, and I couldn't get it. And we had to go down, I went up to Minneapolis to get this. And he wasn't sold on television. He wasn't quite sure that this was going to be what I told him it was going to be.
Corton managed to get the money, and by now we can safely conclude the television was not just a fad. Tonight we celebrate 40 years of broadcasting, and we'll recall some of the people, the pictures, and voices which have come into your homes in those 4 decades. And finally, we'll introduce you to the future of Channel 2. But first, a look back at a moment to remember.
What you doing with that chicken, Ken?
It's my sales pitch. If you're behind the 8 ball because you can't find farm supplies or auto or home supplies you need, come see me. Folks, we're having a good old-fashioned hoedown at KGAN. Well, I know. It's time to buy some seed and plant that garden. Nah, get some new golf clubs and hit one down the fairway. Don't be snowed under. Come for the best ideas and prices through Sunday. KGAN's in Iowa City.
I'm Wade Wagner. Tomorrow on Midday, I'll join Chef Mark in the Midday Kitchen as he prepares pasta. Pasta? I'll join Chef Mark in the Midday Kitchen as he prepares
Let's do that. Remember, it's an old radio and the tubes have to warm up.
RCA Victor Radio and Television Dealer presents Preview of Channel 2.
Good evening. This is Bill Roberts. The big news tonight concerns the WMT television antenna, because today they began raising the antenna sections to the top of the tower. The antenna is a highly complex, highly sensitive finger of steel, an instrument that shoots invisible pictures into the sky, a magic-seeming mechanism that delivers Hopalong Cassidy and John Foster Dulles directly to your living room. But it isn't magic at all. It's a piece of steel 102 feet long, a 7-ton steel pole festooned with bat wings, tubular steel projections from which the TV signal goes out across the land. The WMT television building is coming along in good shape, we're happy to say. The Jetcrete boys will take over and blow the concrete walls into place with a special blower mechanism.
In the meantime, take a drive out to the new tower. See for yourself how rapidly we're approaching television reception here in Cedar Rapids. Then you'll see why we keep telling you to visit Smolikoff's and see RCA Victor TV now before the rush starts.
Folks wanted television. TV dealer newspaper ads in the Cedar Rapids Gazette heralded the target sign-on date. The enterprising station manager, Bill Quarton, and sales manager, Lou Van Ostren, thought it would be a coup to carry the World Series. But it was on NBC. WMT would be a CBS affiliate. So Van Ostren flew to NBC New York and was persuasive. NBC finally told him,
You can have the program, you can have it to use as an opener, but we're going to charge you $5,000. And that was when Bill says, where do you propose to get the $5,000? And I said, well, that's your problem, that's not mine.
Quarton says, as it turned out, NBC never billed WMT, and he never reminded them. Finally, the big day came, September 30th, 1953.
Yeah, I gave a stuttering little 5-minute introduction.
This is WMT TV, Channel 2 in Cedar Rapids. As WMT TV officially begins its first day of telecasting, we wish to present the General Manager of WMT and WMT TV, Mr. William B. Quarton.
This is a great day for us, and I hope it is for you, too. Way back in 1940, out at the All-Iowa Fair, WMT had an exhibit, a television exhibit, the first time that Iowa people saw television. Ever since then, we have been hoping for this day, and here it is. Great many of you have expressed tremendous interest in the station, and we're very grateful for that. But we aren't ready for visitors, and we do wish that you'd give us a little more time to get adjusted to our new operation. Now, we've had a wonderful time building this station. I've never had an experience like it in my life. Just everything has been right and clicked all the way. Please do remember that we are not experts. We're trying to do the best we can. We're going to make many mistakes. You're going to have a lot of fun with us, laughing at our mistakes. But one of these days we'll end up, I feel confident, with a very good operation. So let me end my little talk with a plea to you to please be patient with us. And now let's enjoy the 1953 World Series.
The Gillette Cavalcade of Sports is on the air.
Good afternoon, baseball fans. This is Ben Scully greeting you for the Gillette Safety Razor Company.
And although the station was on the air, the building wasn't quite completed, according to film department head Jackie Grant.
We had no furniture to speak of, no water, no food, and the worst thing was no toilets.
Oh, boy.
So when you had to go to the bathroom, you had to get in your car and go to a friend's house over in the neighborhood.
But we're happy to say the station did get bathrooms and has continually broadcasted from right here, Broadcast Park, from then till now.
Okay, Gary, thanks. And when we come back, we'll take a look at 40 years of Channel 2 News.
If you can wait a short time for delivery, Kenwood House offers 20% savings on sofas, love seats, and chairs. Custom covered in your choice of fabric, pattern, and color. Your choice of many furniture styles. Your choice of nationally renowned manufacturers. I'm Carolyn Mungavin, and I'm Paula Van Diest, two of Kenwood's 7 interior designers.
Coming up, Iowan Mike Boddicker comments on a season without a win.
And John faces one of the wackiest sports challenges you'll ever see. All that and more next in the Farm News.
With news you can trust in Cedar Rapids, Waterloo, this is WMT Television, Channel 2.
From the Broadcast Center for Eastern Iowa, this is the WMT News Scene Tonight.
Good evening. There was nearly another national tragedy today. President Ford narrowly escaped assassination.
WMT News Watch at 10. From Broadcast Park, Eastern Iowa's Communications Center, News Watch at 6. Your source for local news. John Bachman and Jane Hansen bring you the news. Radar weather with Conrad Johnson and sports with Ron Gonder. Look at today's news, reported by Dave Shea and Maggie Jensen.
We know what matters.
Now, from the Eastern Iowa news team that knows what matters, this is the Channel 2 News at 10.
The personality of a television station, or at least the way most people perceive that personality, is defined to a great extent by its newscasts and the people who present them. So, news has been very important to us from the start. We did our first newscast in November of 1953, just a few weeks after we signed on. Bill Roberts was the newscaster. Bob Bruner had just joined the staff and says that first news program did not go exactly as planned.
Our first newscast on Channel 2, they had a big production already, and they were going to have everybody on the news staff and introduce them on the air that night. Bill Roberts was going to do the show. We got all set. Everybody was nervous, of course. Our commercial, I can't remember what it was. It might have been Full of Pep or something of this sort. But the commercial was live, way at the other end of the studio. Well, the cameraman, we had two cameras, but this one cameraman had to go all the way down there and shoot that and then come back. We got ready to go on the air, and the cameraman came rushing back, and all of a sudden he said, "Somebody take over," and he fell on the floor, passed out. And here we were, nervous anyway, in our first newscast, and our cameraman had passed out on the floor. And what had happened, he had a trick shoulder or something, and the only way he could get the thing back was lie on the floor and squirm and get it back in. But that was quite a night, our debut on Channel 2 News.
Soon after that, Henry Lippold began a late evening newscast at 10:30. Also on the staff at that time was Robert M.L. Bob Johnson, who later became Cedar Rapids Safety Commissioner, Mayor, and a state legislator. When Bill Roberts became Washington Bureau Chief for the Time Life Stations, Bruner took over the 6 and started a new newscast at noon.
Our first newscasts, for example, at noon, only with one camera. Well, that was a problem when we were using still pictures. And believe it or not, they would, I introduce a picture and the camera would pan over to the picture and pan back to the newscaster and this type of thing.
In 1959, Henry Lippold left to teach journalism at the University of Illinois, and I came from WOW-TV in Omaha to take his place as anchor of the 10:30 news. Back then, the news, weather, and sports were very separate, self-contained programs. Conrad Johnson, who did the weather, Tate Cummins, who did the sports, and I were never shown together and never talked back and forth like we do now. But all of that changed in 1960. This promotion picture shows Conrad, Tate, and I moving the 10:30 newscast to 10 o'clock and doing a much more integrated news, weather, and sports program, which we called Report to Iowa. I don't know that we originated it, but we were among the very first in the nation to adopt that kind of format, which is standard today. Our news staff in the early 60s was small. In this picture, I count 11 men here, but there were a couple more. But that was for both television and radio, for both news and farm. Now we have twice that many people for TV news alone, and many are women. This group that I started with was very talented, and many had significant careers in business and politics as well as in journalism. Grant Price was the news director, Bob Bruner and Conrad were there, and we had 2 of the best reporters any station ever had. Martin Jensen was more doggedly persistent and perceptive in pursuing a story than anyone else I've ever known. He left to join the staff of Governor Harold Hughes. I always thought that Martin was fully equal to Dick Threlkeld, who went on to a distinguished career as a network correspondent with CBS and ABC News. The appearance of newscasts and of all television has changed dramatically since those days. A lot of our visuals were black and white still pictures, which we took ourselves or got from wire service facsimile machines, and the pace has become a whole lot faster. One of the landmark changes took place during one of Bob Bruner's 6 o'clock newscasts in the mid-1960s.
And by the way, Bob, don't you think it's about time for you to move into your new color set?
Well, I have one more question that maybe you can answer while I'm on my way down the studio to the news set. Just what will this change mean to the Channel 2 viewers who will still be watching us in black and white?
Well, we think you'll see a big difference on black and white receivers. The new color cameras will give an improved monochrome picture, and all our new color sets here in the studio were designed with that in mind. Are you all set, Bob? Take it away in full spectrum color.
Well, Doug, first I'd like to say this, that I feel doubly honored to have been chosen to be the first one involved in our big change, because there are so many much more colorful characters around here than this reporter. In the news tonight, Governor Hughes has raised doubts about Dubuque's financial flood dilemma. We'll have the story right after this message for Standard Oil.
It's hard to believe that changes in technology and technique have occurred any faster in any other business. Maggie Jensen, the first permanent female anchor, is symbolic of the arrival of women in television news, and she recently talked about some other changes that occurred after she came in the mid-70s.
And it was an interesting time to get into broadcasting because that was the advent of the ENG era, the electronic news gathering era, at the time of the switch from film to tape. And then the switch to tape led to the microwave capability and the ability to go live. So every year we were playing with more new toys and the technology was getting more advanced and it was changing the nature of our job.
Maggie talked about the advent of microwave capability. We did a promotional piece which made a big thing out of something we now consider commonplace, and it will also show you some people you may remember.
I'm John Bachman. It's 5 o'clock. WMT Newswatch goes on the air in 1 hour. Newswatch producer Steve Yates included a live report via microwave in his plans for the 6 o'clock news that night. If all went well, it would be a first, the first area-wide live news report in eastern Iowa television. The Instacam van was dispatched to Matzel Bridge County Park for a story involving a pipeline controversy. We sent along a camera to record the event so that we could show you what happened. While cameraman Doug Brandt and reporter Mike Walsher were setting up for the story out in the field, preparations for the newscast were being completed. And at 6 o'clock, director Mike Murray went on the air with WMT Newswatch.
WMT Newswatch at 6. Dave Shea, John Bachman, and the entire Newswatch team report the day's events.
Stand by. Okay, up on 2 and queuing.
A crude oil pipeline would run through several farms in northeastern Lynn County and right through a county park. Mike has a live Instacam report on the pipeline battle.
Well, Dave, I'm reporting from the Matzel Bridge County Park, the eastern part of Lynn County. Mike Walsher live from Matzel Bridge County Park, 15 miles out from the WMT studios as the crow flies, Thursday, March 31st. It was a first for us, and the first of many area-wide live reports by the WMT Newswatch team you'll be seeing here on Channel 2. One of the most important jobs for electronic journalism is bringing you the news with as little delay as possible between the time it happens and the time you know about it. Now with live microwave and Instacam, we can bring you news reports as they happen throughout the WMT area.
I believe that John Bachman, whom you saw on that tape, and I were the first regular co-anchors in this area. John is now anchoring in Des Moines. This quartet includes Ron Gonder, now at WMT, Jane Hansen, who went on to anchor in New York, Jeff Thompson, a businessman in Cedar Rapids, and Conrad. We don't have the time to mention the hundreds of news people who made important contributions, but among the most visible were the anchors: Gene Lively, Ann Irvin, Laurie Stephens, Chuck Shalene, Kristen Dodd, Pete Cipher, and Maggie Jensen.
It gave me a lot. Being visible and recognizable in eastern Iowa is a really nice place to be recognizable because there are so many nice people. And they treat me so well, and the audience, you know, was wonderful to me all the way through thick and thin, good times and in bad. So that was a precious thing that I think few professions can give you.
And now we come to the present. Amy Johnson.
Hi.
Amy, what's impressed you about some of these old things you've seen tonight?
Well, so much has impressed me, but the one thing that stands out in my mind as a young girl, I couldn't watch that many women on TV. There weren't that many women that were role models as broadcast journalists. And these days, women have so many wonderful opportunities in this field. It's a great chance for them to grow. And now I have something to ask you. Okay. I want to know, in your 35 years, what stands out in your mind about the past 35 years? Any event or anything specific?
Frankly, there's not any single event that stands out. There have been a whole bunch of highlights that I'd kind of lumped together. I think really what I will remember of my years here is the people that I worked with, first of all, But I think even beyond that, it's the people whom I have met as in being a reporter, a newsman. Not only governors and senators and presidents, but even more, the ordinary people like we saw in our flood coverage this summer. People who were very often hit with disasters, but have shown grace and courage and what we like to call Iowa character.
And I can bet a lot of those people aren't going to forget you either, Dave.
Well, I won't forget them, and I thank them for letting me come into their home all these years.
We thank you. And one more question. Would you do it all over again? If you had the chance to do all of it again, would you?
I do most of it. I try to improve on a lot of things, though. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Believe it or not, news was not the first local program broadcast on WMT-TV. Next, we'll salute the first Channel 2 personality to present a local program and his contribution to Eastern Iowa athletics.
They'll know you've arrived when you drive up in the 1958 Edsel, the car that's truly new from nameplate to taillights. Of all the medium-priced cars, car for car, across the board, the 1958 Edsel is the one that's new and the lowest price, too.
Oh! Sports, too, has always been important to Channel 2. And Mike Ducey tells us what's happened in that area since 1953. Mike?
Well, Dave, sports broadcasting began the very first day on the air. It started with a man who became one of the best-known and most colorful personalities in Iowa.
Many of us drive by this sign every day, Tate Cummins City Park, Tate Cummins Sports Complex. For some, it's just a sign, but for many more, it's a reminder of a man who spent 35 years as a broadcaster and a friend to Eastern Iowa. Tate Cummins came to WMT Radio in 1947, fresh off a stint as sports editor at the Gazette. WMT's general manager at that time, Bill Quarton, recalls his first meeting with Tate.
He was a great writer, better a writer than he was on the air. And he said, do you have a pad? And I said yes, and I reached over and got my pad and gave it to him. He pulled out his pen, and he wrote this thing and handed it to me. And it was, if you hire me, you can can me on 1 minute's notice. And I laughed and hired him.
Tate more than earned his keep for many years to come, moving to the television side when Channel 2 signed on in 1953. In fact, it was Tate who hosted the first live broadcast on Channel 2, an interview with then Hawkeye football coach Forrest Evashevsky. Tate would spend the next 11 years as the sports voice of Channel 2. Tate's wife Dottie shot many of the early photographs for Tate's broadcasts, working as her husband's assistant.
He genuinely was a warm, friendly, honest person. He didn't have a phony bone in his body, and I think that came through. I wish I had a nickel for every woman who ever said to me, I don't care anything about sports, I just like to watch your husband or listen to your husband.
Even with the advent of television, of course, Tate stayed very much on the radio, the ever-present voice in the Hawkeye press box, along with Frank Caridio.
Well, regardless of how anybody else's games come out, either this week or next, I have never seen a team that I thought more deserving of the honors that these youngsters have.
Tate was anything but a typical TV anchor. His look, his voice, his style were one of a kind.
But can you imagine how the old blood pressure would rise if your team was within a point of Ohio State late in the game and Jerry Lucas drew a 30-second trip to the penalty box?
Tate left television in 1964, moving exclusively to WMT Radio, where he retired in 1971, but his vignettes and prediction shows were heard on radio right up until his death in 1984. When Tate left TV in 1964, Mechanicsville native Paul Eels took over the sports chair, stayed until 1967. Paul is now play-by-play voice of the Arkansas Razorbacks. Remember Bob Nelson? Bob was Channel 2 Sports weeknight anchor from 67 till 69. In 69, a lanky native of New York State came over from KRNT in Des Moines. His name, Ron Gonder.
here I was to do the 6 and the 10 and all of the Iowa play-by-play, and I liked the idea of associating with one team, so that was appealing.
Gonder was part of Eastern Iowa's favorite news team in the 1970s, along with Dave Shea, Conrad Johnson, and many others. Dave and Conrad handled the serious worlds of news and weather, but Ron liked to lighten the mood a bit in sports.
Dave to agree to it, I may just take Billie Jean, put the kiss of death on her.
Yeah, I started to talk to Shea. You know, if he gave it to me, I had something to say back to him, I would talk with him a little bit. So that got to be a change that took place, I think, where we kind of interrelated, and I did the same with Conrad, and it was usually with humor, some form of humor.
And he broke it by a quarter inch. That's about that much.
I really, really enjoyed those days.
Gonder moved exclusively to radio after the sale of the stations in 1981. He remains the popular sports director of WMT Radio and the voice of Iowa Hawkeye basketball.
Midwest League action.
In 1981, Gonder's former assistant Dick Bramer took over the weeknight sports chair at Channel 2. The Twin Cities native soon returned to the Twin Towns, where he remains as a TV play-by-play announcer for the Minnesota Twins. After Bramer, Howard James took over as TV sports director. The native Texan was there for Iowa's 1981 football win over Michigan State. It sent the Hawks to their first Rose Bowl in more than 2 decades.
Mystery, this Rose Bowl. Offensively, the Hawkeyes threw just about everything in the book at Washington.
When Howard left the station in '84, Pete Seifer took over. Pete was best known as a former All-State baseball and basketball player at Cedar Rapids, Washington, but soon made his mark as an enthusiastic reporter and one with great knowledge of local sports. He took us through some exciting years. Pete covered a World Series that featured Iowa and Mike Boddicker and took us through some of the high points in Hawkeye history.
Down here on the field, the Hawkeyes, Rob Holman with the winning field goal. Iowa wins it 12-10.
Battle for the Big Ten lead and the top spot.
When Pete moved to news in 1988, Channel 2 welcomed to the position of sports director Californian John Baer. His boom times of the week and sports challenge segments became weekly staples. John left KGAN in 1991 and is now advertising sales director for Voice of the Hawkeyes magazine.
It's interesting that a couple of traditions started by Tate continue even today, Dave. One of them, of course, the interview segments with Iowa football coaches. Tate did the first one with Evie on the first day we were on the air, and you can still see the Iowa Coaches Show with Hayden Fry every Sunday morning here on Channel 2. The other one, the phoning in of scores from high schools. Tate was the first one to begin that in broadcasting. He'd get 800, 900 scores some nights before school consolidation back in those days. So just a couple of things that endure.
I remember we had 6, 8 people taking phone calls in those sports. If there was one thing that Tate loved more than sports, it was bridge. And one night, many years ago, George Forstner, who was president of Amana Refrigeration and a bridge player, brought to the station Charles Gorin, who is the most famous bridge player of that time or any time, and Howard Schenken, who is probably the best bridge player, certainly at that time. And Charles and Howard and George and Tate sat down and played bridge, and it was a wonderful time for Tate. And afterwards, he always used to say that I'm the guy who set Charles Gorin 4 tricks playing as his partner.
And really one of a kind, wasn't he?
He really was. Thanks, Mike. And while Tate was the early name for sports, Conrad was the name Iowans came to regard as synonymous with weather. From the weather tower to Doppler radar, we'll look back at the people that have kept Channel 2 viewers informed about Iowa's cranky, almost unpredictable weather. Next.
Traditional styling. That's what he wants. He is determined. He's direct, elegant, and it shows in his clothes. Tradition means everything to him. That's why he buys his clothes at Clancy's.
Traditional men's clothing at Clancy's Limited. Modern leisure styles at Clancy's too.
Then by 6 o'clock tomorrow night, the low will have moved fairly close to us, about the Kansas City area. Precipitation covering a much broader area. And by midnight tomorrow night, we're looking for the low to be up in the Great Lakes area. And as it moves into the upper Great Lakes area, we're looking for the precipitation to start to move out of our area. That's by Tuesday morning. We should be just down to flurries. We'll be back and give you a detailed look at what kind of precipitation we'll have when, right after this.
recent poll conducted by Channel 2 revealed that one of the top reasons people watch local news is to see the weather forecast. Ironically, the earliest newscasts on Channel 2 did not include as detailed a forecast as we're accustomed to today. KGAN meteorologist Tim Heller joins us now with a look at weathercasts from the past. Tim?
Dave, having grown up watching Channel 2 my entire life, it's kind of fun to look back and see how dramatically things have changed, and in some ways how we've stayed the same. Not only have the faces changed over the years, the technology we use to predict the weather has advanced as well. Yet we're still trying to answer that one simple question. What's it going to be like tomorrow?
Good evening, everyone. It appears now that our rain is not going to arrive as far in any appreciable amounts before much later tonight.
We started out with a bare map and we did all the drawing. We had no satellites, we had no radar at that time. We had no graphic capabilities. Computers weren't even known to be able to do this. But I can see evidence that there's no end to it yet.
Someone once said about Conrad Johnson, when he forecast rain, people all over eastern Iowa shut their windows. Conrad's no-nonsense approach to weather was one you could trust, and one you did trust for 23 years. Conrad taught us how the weather worked, while he explained why it was going to change the next few days.
Conrad was quite a teacher. For me, I really looked up to him because he knew everything about this weather phenomena here in eastern Iowa. He'd seen everything before, and you could always look to him for advice. You'd ask him, well, what do you think the overnight low was? And you'd think of something in your own mind, and he'd end up being right.
Dave Town worked with Conrad Johnson in the late 1970s. He says that was a simpler time, before computers and animated graphics.
We used shoe polish to write on the maps, and we experimented with several different brands of shoe polish, and the white would usually dribble down, or it would show up after you tried to erase it. So that was kind of unfortunate. And the black would never come off. And then, of course, you'd always try to draw something on the air, and it would have dried up by that time. So you'd be sitting there trying to get something scribbled on the screen, and it wouldn't work.
They still say that we had the best weather system of anybody in the Midwest. And they really appreciated that because they could depend on the forecast being accurate enough that they could make plans based on it. And that, to me, is the biggest accomplishment that we had.
Conrad wasn't the first Channel 2 weatherman. In the very early days, a number of WMT radio personalities would climb up the famous Shell Weather Tower, which was really only a few feet off the floor.
Well, look at that. It's one of those things that's very, very difficult to call. We have a couple of combinations of things. If either one of them vary a great deal, we can have an interesting weekend.
There was a sudden change of pace after Conrad retired in 1980. Channel 2 opened up the weather closet, and out popped Bill Bailey and his weather duck.
You know, it's going to be one of those forgettable weekends.
Oh,
you know, you like to say, boy, have we got weather for you? Very little of that sort of thing coming up next.
This is Channel 2, Cedar Rapids and Waterloo.
A punk rock artist. That's a punk rocker. Look at that. Isn't that great? That's the lead singer from Al Hinkle's favorite group, Porcelain Convenience. Porcelain Convenience, appearing nightly.
At midday, Barry Norris included a little cartoon fun in his weathercast.
I could just have fun with it. I wasn't a meteorologist, didn't pretend to be. I was a guy who came out and tried to explain the weather and just, enjoyed it. And so we did enjoy the weather.
Later, Dave Town put the meteorology back into weather by taking us behind the forecast and into the weather lab.
But once again, I'd like to mention that all the watches and the warnings have been canceled at this time. We are experiencing thunderstorms at the present time over much of eastern Iowa. In fact,
the style of the weathercast changed dramatically over the past 40 years, and so did the technology. In the early 1960s, Channel 2 installed what was then a new piece of weather equipment called radar.
Collins, our neighbors, had this in airplanes, and after the war, they said, let's try this. Just put it up on the building and see if it'll work. And we did, and it worked.
At the present time, the radar shows a band of thunderstorms about 15 to 20 miles wide, extending from just west of Manchester, southwestward down through about Shellsburg, west of the Lynn County line, and then on down in toward Williamsburg.
Chicago had actually the first one. We were the first one west of Mississippi. The first severe thunderstorm that I saw that was reaching up to 55,000 feet was out of Belmont, Iowa. And when I showed that on the air, I got the greatest thrill
being able to see anything at that distance, and it gave me a lot of confidence in the radar right off the bat when I could see that. I knew that if I could pick it up at that distance, it had to be severe, and sure enough, there was a tornado that same time in Belmont.
The installation of that radar set a precedent. Since then, Channel 2 has tried to lead the way in weather technology.
Version, and you can see some of these rather potent showers and thunderstorms, from Butler and Bremer moving into Fayette counties.
The map on the wall was replaced with a computer graphics system.
Family of lows, cold air coming down from the north, warm, humid air moving up from the south, and the recipe for stormy weather is all intact.
This is the radar, Doppler radar at 920, and we can see that cell was in the Waterloo area, just west of Waterloo, and a little heavier cell just to the north of Waterloo. This has been tracking off to the northeast just a bit, and it's a very isolated cell, just that one.
Eventually, the older radar was turned off, and a new Doppler radar was installed. Then later, total radar enhanced the coverage of threatening weather.
We tried to tailor our broadcasts and our weathercasts to where it would be doing the most good to the most people, to the point where they can understand and relate it to their own operation, to the point where they maintain a lot of reliability on our forecast. And I think that's the biggest legacy we've had.
Through the years, the technology and personalities have changed, but the commitment that was established 40 years ago remains just as strong today.
The model certainly in my mind is Conrad Johnson, who I watched as I grew up, and it's his tradition that we're still trying to follow today.
Conrad was just immensely dedicated. I do remember when we'd have threatening weather, it was not uncommon for him to be, alone, work as the one-man weather department. 24, 36 hours, people would bring in food for him, so he didn't have to leave the station. Do you think, Tim, that weather forecasting is more accurate today?
I think people would disagree with my answer, but I do think it is more accurate. We're trying to present different information today than they were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Instead of just saying that it's going to rain tomorrow, we're saying it's going to start in the morning, end in the afternoon, a half an inch to an inch and a half, maybe flash flooding. So we're giving more detailed forecasts, plus we're talking about a greater length of time. Instead of just 3 days or 5 days, we're talking sometimes 7 days, 30 days, even 90 days. And when you start doing that, you open yourself up for there's greater room for error, I should say, and that's kind of where we're headed today.
I remember Conrad told about going out to give a speech at some club or organization, and afterward he said a man came up to him and said, "The only forecast of yours, I believe, is when you say I'll be back again tomorrow night." So he took some heat like all weathermen do, I guess. Thank you, Tim. A lot of eastern Iowans are very much affected by the weather and depend on weather information for their livelihood, and we're talking about farmers. Next, Wade Wagner will reacquaint us with some of those who preceded him as Channel 2 Farm Director.
If only I had my kid's space whistle.
KED's space whistle contains a secret code compartment and sends powerful audiogenic waves at a single blast. With it, Scott can contact Colonel KED. Here's your free KED space whistle.
Colonel KED saves the day.
But not without KED's and KED's space whistle.
Chairman of the panel of university directors that recommended demolishing Steffens Hall is Wayne Norman Sr., who's built quite a reputation as a restorer of old buildings. Norman says he's all in favor of restoration if the building is viable. It's just that Steffens Hall isn't. I'm happy to Action News, Dubuque.
Couldn't start up a new TV station in the heart of eastern Iowa without paying special attention to farmers. For years they had listened to their market report on WMT radio, but in 1953 they could see it on Channel 2. WMT TV's Noon Farm Show provided what we believe was the most comprehensive television news for farmers of any station in the United States. For the past couple of weeks, Farm Director Wade Wagner has been talking with some of his predecessors about their past work here at Channel 2. Wade?
Well, Dave, I got to tell you, it was a lot of fun talking to these guys because I not only worked with some of them as former reporters, but I also grew up watching many of them here on Channel 2. And while they all had their own unique style presenting the news, they all shared a passion for farm broadcasting. A lot of things have changed at Channel 2 in 40 years, but a few things have stayed the same. Today you can watch us at noon and get your latest farm news, markets, and weather, just as your father or grandfather did back in 1953. Bob Nance remembers going on TV with the station's first farm shows, A New Frontier.
If we were doing it wrong, I guess we found out about it, but not very many people knew the difference, you know. We were educating ourselves.
Nance worked under the tutelage of Chuck Wooster, WMT's first farm director.
I learned a lot of my farm broadcasting, if I had any better traits, I guess, from Chuck Wooster.
Wooster recognized the vital link between Channel 2 and farmers. After all, they were a big part of the audience. His commitment to farm news and the farmers was unparalleled by any other station in the country.
Because you were appealing to a specific discipline, a specific occupation. And nowhere else were they really getting the kind of information specifically that they were getting from the WMT stations.
Interior and terminal hogs down 50 cents to $1. Cattle.
Bob Nance worked at Channel 2 for 20 years before moving to Vigortone in 1973. Now he's back behind the mic working part-time for WMT Radio following retirement. He says the TV work, though, was more difficult.
Television's not an easy medium, and one of the big things is that there are 3 or 4 people down the line who've got to know what your next move is.
Nance says the early farm programs were primitive by today's standards. He and his staff had to do some real improvising to make the TV news visually stimulating.
And in those days, believe it or not, this is back in 1957, little Kodak Brownie camera. That was it. No fancy videotape, film, anything like that. And a lot of the stuff that went on the air in terms of visuals was hand-printed or typewritten. But in those days, it sufficed.
We'd get notes from mothers and grandmothers saying, I saw my grandson's picture with his champion heifer. Would you send me a copy of that? Well, we're always happy to do it because we didn't want to keep a file here of 3 million pictures, so we just send it out gratis.
Those who covered the farm news put in some long hours, and they still do, I might add. The intensity was fueled by a love for farm broadcasting.
I think the best part was just being able to get in a car and drive in a matter of minutes, being out in the country, and actually getting out there and seeing what the farmers are experiencing every day, talking with them. To me, that was the real fun of it.
Or you go to a livestock show and you'd stand there with your little 16-millimeter camera, which we used at that time, and they'd say, hey, over on the side of the ring is Jerry Passer or Ron Michelson or Rich Ballvans from Channel 2, and they're taking pictures and it's going to be on tonight. Well, you better make sure that you had it on that night because they were telling everybody you were taking pictures at the show.
There's something magic about television and something magic about what you can do with the medium, the combination of the video and the audio, telling a story.
We see each other starting at 5 o'clock in the morning and sometimes end up out at a pork producer's banquet at 9 o'clock at night. So, yes, there was a great sense of camaraderie and a lot of time spent together.
You are a slave of the clock. And after a while, once you get used to and comfortable with that, then I think that you aren't aware of the stress that you are under because it's rather subliminal.
Helping ease that stress, the humorous experiences along the way. Live swine judging contests were often held during the noon show.
Pig got loose. Pig not only got loose, but Pig got excited. And Pig did all sorts of things in the studio. You can imagine.
The farm department sponsored a lot of big events, including the National Corn Picking Contest, Iowa's Favorite Farmer's Daughter, and the Invention Convention. Along with the routine news, it all intensified a loyal audience for those farm broadcasters working at Channel 2.
The farmer feels that the farm broadcaster is a personal friend, and they really feel that you're part of the family. And the longer you're in it, the closer a family member you are. In fact, you might be even closer to them than some of their real family members.
And farmers had a chance to become part of our family as well with a series of Farm Watch reports. The special series allowed Channel 2 to go into the farm business by raising corn, feeder pigs, and a dairy calf, among other things, over several seasons. It was designed to enlighten consumers about the routine challenges and weather worries facing farmers on a daily basis.
I think farmers feel as though they're underappreciated, and so any exposure on radio or television was a way at that time, perhaps still is, a way to tell their story, which they feel oftentimes is either over-romanticized so that people don't get the idea that there's nitty-gritty work going on here, or just plain misunderstood.
Well, we certainly hope that's not the case anymore here in eastern Iowa, where over the years Channel 2 has tried to provide comprehensive coverage of farm issues. I think you've seen evidence tonight that those who worked in this very studio did their best to keep everybody informed about farming here in the state of Iowa. And Dave?
Wade, how many farm directors have we had?
Well, Dave, there have been 8 of us, and I hope up to now I've maybe been one of your favorites.
Up to now, but we'll check in the future.
Okay.
Thanks, Wade. Farm News is just a small part of Channel 2's weekday local programming. Next, we'll hear from some of the people Eastern Iowans have welcomed into their living rooms each weekday afternoon as our celebration of 40 years together continues.
Sunbird, the Pontiac Sunbird. See it now at your Eastern Iowa Pontiac dealers. There's a 5-year, 60,000-mile guarantee on the 140 cubic inch engine. Base price, $3,431. Now, at your Eastern Iowa Pontiac dealers.
But next on the weather map is another cold front, which is across the northwest this evening, and this is going to be causing a large area of blue crossing down through the country, which means the computer is not going to work exactly right. Maggie, show me that black marker, would you?
Thousands of Eastern Iowans will remember the people you're about to see. Chris Peddley joins us now with a look at Channel 2's local daytime programming. Chris?
Dave, the programs help the area's homemakers learn how to cook, how to sew, basically how to raise their families. They kept Eastern Iowans in shape, too. First, every day from 1 until 1:30 in the afternoon, women sat down in front of the television to watch Home Fair. The half-hour show debuted on September 28, 1954. The hostess, Marguerite Ashlock. For 30 minutes every day, Marguerite entertained audiences with recipes and interviews for the homemaker. The show appeared live each day from a kitchen and living room at Broadcast Park.
It gave me an opportunity to sell my idea of better nutrition, better health through eating foods, better health through preparation of foods. I mean, we weren't paid too much. If we could get on the show and we'd really tell people that you are what you eat. And I think that's one of the reasons why Home Fair lasts so long, because we tried to give them something than just an ordinary recipe.
Ashlock hosted the show for 10 years, then retired, setting the stage for the next woman to step in.
I was starting the film department.
Jackie Grant remembers the show like it was yesterday. With co-hosts Mary Walker and Georgia Frederick by her side, the trio debuted the new Home Fair in 1964. Grant still lives on Cedar Rapids' southeast side. She remembers the show with great fondness.
My end of the show was mostly cooking and sewing, and I did crafts and interviews. And according to the Mail, a lot of men stayed at the lunch hour because they said they won't go out until after they see Home Fair. I tested lots of recipes, and we got recipes from all over.
Her goal was to provide area homemakers with useful information they could use to help them raise their families. She remembers the many interview guests that brought their expertise to the show, including many celebrities.
Don DeFore was, of course, from Cedar Rapids. And he and, I think one of them was his brother, and 2 other had a quartet used to sing on WMT. I think one of the funnier, interesting guests was Joan Kennedy, Ted Kennedy's then wife. And she and Ann Culver was the wife of John Culver, who was a senator at the time. I said, what do you want to make? And she said, oh, why don't we make a chocolate cake? About, that fall, I think, she wrote and said that they had a birthday party in Washington for Ted Kennedy's birthday, And as a surprise, Ann Culver baked a chocolate cake and wrapped it all up. And they took and presented it to Ted at this dinner and said, "This is the cake that Joan baked on home fair in Cedar Rapids, Iowa."
Along the way, she managed to coax her colleagues into the kitchen with her. Dave Shea, Dean Borg, Grant Price. She even says she taught Conrad Johnson how to knit.
And he said, "I hurried around to see if Jan had any knitting needles and yarn. I found some needles, but couldn't find any yarn." So he took an old long shoestring, and he said, "I learned how to knit with a shoestring."
Each week, viewers could also expect this in the mail, the WMT Home Fair newsletter. Inside would be recipes, interviews, and reviews about CBS television shows. That newsletter continued until 1973. After all of the eating, Eastern Iowans could join this woman, the exercise guru of her time.
Of how much tension you have in your spine and how much flexibility you could get back into it.
Long before Jane Fonda hit the celebrity workout scene, Marlis was getting Eastern Iowans into shape. She came into our homes every day starting in 1968, first debuting in Home Fair.
We started it locally here as just a one-time promotion for some fitness classes that I was teaching back then at the Y. And it was on Home Fair, and Jackie Grant said, "Come on in and let's see what you're doing in your classes. Help the other people try to get in shape." And so that was the goal. It was kind of ahead of its time in a way. Hands together behind your back, take a deep breath.
So much so, Marlis went syndicated. From Louisville to the Missouri State Penitentiary, people were exercising. Marlis' show ran in Arkansas. She thinks she may have had something to do with the man in the White House.
Who knows, maybe even little Billy Clinton exercised with Marlis.
Exercise with Marlis lasted 12 years before going off the air in 1980. Height also hosted Modern Woman, taking over for Jan Voss, who left the show to run for state representative. Also during the 70s, some other shows may come to mind. Shows like Weekday Live, an informal interview show hosted by Sue Toma.
So all these will be exhibited, or is it going to just be up and down Czech Village?
It's up and down.
Some folks may remember other shows we pioneered here at Channel 2. So many of them have either gotten lost, or as is the case with as many of the live shows, they weren't recorded because it was simply too expensive to do so.
I think, Chris, that every station in the country had a homemaker program 30 or 40 years ago, but probably hardly any do now.
That's very true. We were dealing with a different lifestyle at that point in our lives 30, 40 years ago. Many women have left the home today, so the shows aren't there because they're not at home. But on Midday today, we have the news, we have the weather, the agriculture reports. We also have a very informational show, though. Lots of experts and guests providing their expertise to a very diverse, intelligent audience.
Some of the same content, anyway.
Exactly.
Okay, Chris, thank you. The late afternoons for the last 40 years have belonged to Eastern Iowa's youngest viewers. Kids of all ages have turned to Channel 2 for programs designed especially for them. They'll take you down memory lane with some of your early favorites next.
Unglamorous item. Now this is one part. It's made of wood and it's 21 inches long with threads cut into one end. This is the other part. It's made of rubber and has a circular flap that snaps in and out. The two pieces fit together like this. This item has no glamour, adds absolutely no excitement to your life. But when stop drains create a small water problem in your house, then you need this in the worst way. Be prepared. Get one now. Priced at just $1.77 at your Liberty store, and it's the best. Name, Hydro Thrust Force Cup.
By 1953, Eastern Iowa youngsters were familiar with NBC's Howdy Doody, who had already been on the air 6 years. And when Channel 2 signed on, it didn't take long for a long tradition of local children's programming to begin.
That's right, Dave. Members of the baby boom generation were, well, babies. And one way for sponsors to reach kids was through KidVid. And if young viewers learned something and were entertained too, well, all the better. CBS would give us Bob Keeshan as Captain Kangaroo in 1955. But a year earlier, just 4 months after sign-on in January '54, Channel 2 began Miss Ruth Ann's School at 4:30 in the afternoon. Mighty Fine products just happened to be on the shelves of the Mighty Fine Kids store on the set. A whole generation of today's adults remembers saddling up with Marshall J., who rode onto TV screens March 1st, 1954. Unfortunately, the show has to live in memory because there are no known copies of his show. The Marshal would ride off into the California sunset in 1961 to do a similar show in San Francisco, thus opening this famous store. Max Hahn was a long-time community theater performer.
What are we going to call it? One of the boys come down the hall toward me then, and he says, we got it. We got to settle. You're Dr. Max. And gee, that sounded awful. Dr. Max? What was that? I thought that was a terrible name for a show. But I guess it's caught on.
Operations manager Doug Grant thought Max would make a good kids' TV host, and the Dr. Max show would prove him right. Max died in 1985, 3 years after the show's sign-off. But Max's longtime TV partner, Fred Petrick, who is Mambo the Clown, is still a joy to talk with.
I didn't quite catch that.
Originally, Fred was only supposed to make a couple of appearances as Mambo, but it turned into a couple of decades. At first, Mambo was just a silent clown.
But I just sat at his feet, and he did all the talking, and I'd react and so on. And finally one day Max said, Mama, Fred, he says, you've got to talk. He says, the kids are writing in and they want you to talk. I think he rued that he was sorry he said that, because from there on I was a jabbermouth.
There you go. Okay. Woo-woo! Goodbye, go fly a kite, Mambo!
Max was a good actor. He was a good actor. I enjoyed being with him. The show was entirely ad-libbed. And I'd throw an ad-lib to him, and he'd pick it up and throw it back, and we were able to empathize and work nicely together.
And once, Fred stepped out of character to present Casey at the Bat.
Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. Somewhere bands are playing, and somewhere hearts are light. Somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out.
I enjoyed the work. It wasn't work. I enjoyed the pleasure.
Well, when you look back at the 20 years that you and Max were on the show, what kind of feeling does that give you?
It's a feeling of satisfaction, real satisfaction that the kiddies out there and the people liked us. And when you please people, it gives you a good feeling. And as I say, the Almighty was very good. He gave me the chance, and the kiddies, I want to give the kiddies credit, because if they hadn't kept in touch with us and been so loyal, such loyal viewers, we wouldn't have been on as long as we were. So to all you kiddies out there and you grown-ups now, thank you, thank you, thank you.
I'm going to see all of you again real soon, I hope. So watch out your front door when the next car goes by. Might be me going by and say hi. Bye, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you all. Wave them all goodbye.
Goodbye.
Well, WMT, it was in those days. Now it's KGAN. And I want to wish you a very, very happy birthday. The invention they had of television certainly developed, and I appreciate all the goodness you gave us, the Dr. Max Show. Bye-bye. Take it easy, play it safe, and be careful. Oh, I plagiarized there, took his lines. I'm sorry.
Yes, wherever, whatever you clean, now's the time to get Mr. Clean himself.
Mr. Clean gets rid of dirt and grime and grease in just a minute. Mr. Clean will clean your whole house and everything that's in it. Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean, Mr. Clean.
The quarterly cattle on feed report was issued late yesterday by the USDA. We'll have a look at some of those national figures, but first, one cattleman's reaction to Iowa's cattle numbers.
How is this?
Got the wrong tape. We'll try and get it later, huh? I didn't have to pull that cattleman off the golf course for that story. He was out on the farm.
In its early days, Channel 2 produced hours of local programs each week. Daytime shows like Home Fair, children's shows like Marshall J. and Dr. Max, along with regular news and information programming. KGAN rejoins us now to recall a man whose local entertainment show was a longtime staple.
It ran for 16 years, from 1953 to 1969, and sponsored by one company. And Leo Grieco says he enjoyed every minute of the Leo Grieco Show.
We started out originally on Wednesday night at 6:45, and then Arthur Godfrey came along and they preempted us on what, you can guess why, on Wednesday night, and then we went to Saturday evening at 6:15, following the news.
But Leo Grieco and his band had a longer television run locally than the old redhead, 16 years. Remember when Gene Autry came to town and played the Cedar Rapids Coliseum? Gene also played Leo's show.
Yeah, Gene Autry, and you remember Pee Wee King and Hank Thompson and Brenda Lee, and there was quite a few others. Nice people.
Leo had already been on radio for 2 years before coming to TV with his music.
It's a way of life. When I was 10 years old, Dad put the accordion in my hands and said, play. He didn't say, did you want to? But I found out I really enjoyed it. And that's it. That's just that simple. I really enjoyed what I was doing.
Most of Leo's TV shows are only memories. The earliest were live, the later ones on tape that was recycled and not saved. But back in the 50s, Leo was thinking of syndicating shows to other stations and filmed 3 sample shows that haven't been seen in 37 years. Retrieved from Leo's attic, enjoy this rare treat. The opening of this 1956 show, seen at 6:15 right after the news on Saturday night.
Leo Grieco and his Pioneers with Chuck Wooster. Now to take you along to meet the Pioneers, here's Chuck.
It's good to be back again. Right. Gee whiz, I've been waiting to hear you do this banjo tune. That one, Hey, Mr. Banjo! Okay. Huh?
We don't have a banjo, but we like this tune. If we had a banjo, we would just as soon play it all day long. This mountain song, the kind you know makes the whole world go. But we don't have a banjo, maybe this will do. Oh, wow. How about the trumpet? Hey, Mr. Trumpet, play it to me. Mr. Trumpet, it's the melody. Come on, step in front of the window back and give out with that Dixieland. Hey, Mr. Trumpet, blow that horn for me.
Well, the exposure was fantastic. And then just, you know, any place you went, they knew your sponsor. That's what you're there for. If you didn't keep your sponsor happy, you wouldn't be on there. So
You did live TV. Did things go wrong?
You had to ask that, didn't you? There's a tune that I did back when I was with Tom Owens Cowboys called Jolie Blonde. You ever heard of it? It's a French Cajun tune. I started out with Jolie Blonde, squat of fay, horse and buggy, turn and plow. My mind went just blank. That was it. I says, well, excuse me, folks, I think I forgot the words. So I says, guys, would you give me another intro? And we did it. The second time I got through it okay. The most embarrassing, I never, you know, every place I went, people would say, you know, hey, Leo, have you got the tune memorized now?
Before his untimely death in an auto accident, Chuck Wooster, the WMT farm director and later news director, was also Leo's TV MC.
I never saw a man like him. He could take a script and look at it and then just throw it away and get on the air and go that minute without even looking at any script.
A few minutes ago, I was telling you about Dwight Severly of Oakville, Iowa, weaning 256 pigs from 25 sows. That's a terrific average. Now, he started those little pigs, of course, on Kent pig nuggets.
Just fantastic. And such a beautiful person to work with. Just a beautiful person. And the whole crew was that way. I mean, the engineers, the cameramen, really, as far as I'm concerned, it was one happy family.
Glad you could be with us again tonight, friends. Hope you can make it again next week, same time. Meanwhile, this is Chuck Wooster saying so long for Leo and the Pioneers.
Happy birthday, Channel 2, on your 40th anniversary. That's so nice.
There. Oh, you sure have a good-looking family. At first, they all look the same, like banks and savings and loans. Well, sometimes it's tough to tell the difference. But then one breaks away from the rest, tries harder, has something special. You might say it's the pick of the litter.
And this is Samantha, a 14-month-old, 250-pound African lioness. This is about as exotic as you get. She has a hold of my peg on my arm now.
In the last 40 years, thousands of hours of local programs have gone out from right here at Broadcast Park.
But such is the nature of television that very little exists from the early days. However, a few pieces of film and tape have survived the dustbin of history and have survived in storage rooms, attics, and on former employees' old air checks. Here's only a sampling of that rich local programming history of Channel 2. Just 2 years in existence, Channel 2 in 1955 won the distinguished George F. Peabody Award for Public Service. Dr. Alexander Lippisch, director of the Collins Aeronautical Research Lab, produced a series, The Secret of Flight.
The Secret of Flight.
Dr. Lippisch and the WMT TV production staff moved a smoke tunnel into the studio and were able to transform aerodynamics into a living visual experience for viewers. The first time this phenomenon was seen outside the laboratory.
You might see it even better if I turn the blower down so that the whole field slows down and we see it in a slower motion.
In their Peabody application, they explain they wanted to impress young people and perhaps awaken some Iowa youngster to the endeavor of flight. Their endeavor won Channel 2, the Peabody. Hundreds of events have been documented by Channel 2. One of the most remembered by early staffers was the 1958 corn-picking championships on the farm of Loomer Dostal in Marion. Thousands were there, but two famous Americans are particularly remembered.
Eisenhower and Kennedy both came out to the corn-picking contest. The Secret Service wouldn't let anybody leave until Eisenhower was in the air on their back. So we had chartered an airplane, and they were going to bring the film out across from WMT, this little corner on C Avenue and Old Marion Road. They had laid out a cloth target. So this airplane was going to come over and drop the film on this target. Well, evidently the man who was flying the airplane hadn't thought about speed and wind and everything else, because he waited till he was right over the target and he dropped out this film. Well, the film went sailing across C Avenue, over the houses over there, into the woods by the cemetery over there. And here were people from WMT scrambling through the houses, between the houses, over the fence to try to find that film, because there was a deadline. We had to get on the air.
Well, the can of film was found, and just 2 years and 3 months after they shook hands in Marion, JFK followed Ike into the White House and into the history books. In 1959, a young Dave Shea anchored a half-hour documentary, The Padfield Murder Case. Operations manager Doug Grant introduced a repeat of the broadcast.
As a direct result of this documentary, new evidence was uncovered.
She disappeared in the early morning hours of February 19th, 1959. Her coat and sweater were found on Sunday, February 22nd. Her body was discovered 2 months and 10 days later. Tonight's program is a recreation of Marlene's story, as far as we can determine it from facts originally available, plus additional facts unearthed in weeks of research.
The murder of Marlene Padfield remains unsolved today. The 60s saw more documentaries. During the Vietnam War, newsman Dean Borg went to Paris, scene of the peace talks, reporting on POWs and MIAs.
Over the centuries, this city, this country, have seen many wars, been involved in most of the world's conflicts. So it's not surprising that, again, in the Vietnam conflict, even though France is not directly involved, this city is. It's the site of the Vietnam peace talks.
The 70s produced an hour special remembered fondly by those who made it. Grant Wood, artist in overalls.
Much of Grant Wood's work remains here in eastern Iowa. It is our purpose to take a close-up look at the rich heritage he left us. American Gothic at the Art Institute of Chicago. We can imagine that Grant Wood had a lot of fun painting it.
And for years, many viewers anticipated the winner of the live The Favorite Farmer's Daughter broadcast.
And the winner for 1975 in Iowa Favorite Farmer's Daughter contest is Diane Ludke of West Liberty.
All local programs weren't award-winning, but some were fun. Remember this local forerunner to People's Court?
This court is now in session. He told me that the basement had been flooded, so I went and got a plumber's snake and run down through there, and you can't believe, Judge, what I got out of that sewer. I'm afraid to ask. I got a blonde wig out of there, a full-blown blonde wig.
A wig?
Blonde wig?
A wig? A wig?
Wow. They're blaming me for their junk. They plugged the sewer.
Sort of a hairpiece?
How did a wig?
Sort of a hairpiece type blonde wig?
Yeah, it was a nice long wig. A real expensive one, I would just say. a minute. How did the wig get in the sewer, then?
Never like that.
How would I know?
I have several wigs, Your Honor. I wear them all the time.
They don't relate to this case. Isn't that a dandy?
Well, this is one of my better ones. I wear them all the time, but he just doesn't like the blonde
Mrs.
one.
Benson, are you suggesting that he didn't like the wig, and so he tried to dispose of it?
He never did like it. It disappeared. That's all I know.
I paid so much money for that wig, I had to like it.
I doubt. However it got there, Mr. Bragg could not have put it there. I find in favor of the defendant, the case is closed.
He should have fixed it.
And SCTV's Count Floyd had nothing over our own shock theater.
Well, my funeral director is E.N. Bulmer. And E.N. Bulmer says,
And although the Iowa Traveler is not a program per se, the Two-Country Traveler news segment was born in about 1975. Travelers Earl Eldridge, Gary Schendel, Johnny Mann, and Dan Murphy shared their visits with Eastern Iowans. And for the last 10 years as the Iowa Traveler, yours truly, Kerry J. Hahn, has had the happy experience of literally covering Eastern Iowa from the top to the bottom.
tomorrow, we'll
on the sea,
a day in the life of
in the air, and on the road. And I've never met a man, a woman, child, or beast, I didn't like.
Head out on the highway.
And we continue to celebrate Iowa and the people we call neighbors and the place we call home.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. One thing that hasn't changed in Channel 2's 40 years is our involvement in the needs of the communities we serve. We'll have a look at that when we return.
Pick a fresh carnation. Fresh carnation yogurt, naturally tart, now refreshingly fortified with fruit flavors. Pick a fresh carnation.
Excuse me, San Diego over Houston. Excuse me. Well, you may or may not know it, but I'm losing my voice.
Maybe we should take a break. Well, we'll take over.
Throughout its history, Channel 2 has tried to be a community leader in so-called public affairs programming. That's included everything from sponsoring the National Corn Picking Contest to the nation's first Jobathon to publicizing bake sales. Sandy Riesgraff has been looking at our past in public affairs programming. And Sandy, you've been involved in telethons here now for 10 years, but tell us about some of the other aspects of public affairs programming.
Well, Dave, it's amazing when you look back at some of the ground we broke early on in public affairs programming. From the start, it's been Channel 2's way of helping people to help themselves. And one man who took part in many of these activities is Barry Norris.
This is the empty stage of the beautiful Paramount Theater. Soon the stage will come alive with the music of the Cedar Rapids Symphony.
We were one of the first stations to really get involved in public affairs on an ongoing basis, where we felt that the community deserved to have a station that was interested and vital and concerned about what was going on. Good evening. Thank you for calling.
Concerns about what was going on in the community gave birth to the first public affairs program Barry Norris hosted when he arrived at WMT-TV in 1970. The show, live on Sunday nights, Eye on Iowa.
This is Eye on Iowa, Channel 2's call-in program. We did some neat things and had some wonderful people on the show, and had a great deal of fun. Live television is just absolutely magnificent. I love live broadcasting, and so I thrived. I loved it.
Norris loved it, and so did Eastern Iowans. The show eventually became known as this, Sound Off.
Such as a recent
In 1972, WMT-TV took on the one big telethon at the time.
Pay attention to this, everybody. Here we go. This is a big one, a real big one. Yeah.
We did a very minimal effort because it was our first time. We didn't know what we were doing. But it turned out to be very nice. I mean, we raised some money and apparently did what the Muscular Dystrophy Association felt was a good job. And so they said, oh, let's do it every year. And the station felt it had been a good community project, so they said, sure, why not? Sure, let's do it for a couple of 3 years.
Here we go.
Like many of those things, it's still going on, you know.
Which side should I sit? Let me sit on this side.
Okay.
I guess it doesn't make a whole lot of difference.
Hi, Barry.
Listen, I'll tell you, if I sit down, I may never get up.
I mean, we had everyone and their brother came and gave us money at one time or another, even some of the girls of the night. And I do mean the girls of the night.
Jerry Lewis is the first telethon Channel 2 committed to, but not the last.
You're watching the Children's Miracle Network Telethon. And welcome back to Broadcast Park in Cedar Rapids. Pat Clark, Maggie Jensen, Dave Town, and Dean Borg.
For the past 11 years, Channel 2 has dedicated its time and efforts to the Children's Miracle Network Telethon as well.
The spring of 1982, we were going through some really difficult problems with unemployment. And we decided, you know, how in the world can we ever do anything to put a dent in this? And our collective minds said, let's do, if we can do a telethon, why can't we do a jobathon? Dump our primetime programming and let people step up to a camera and say,
hi, my name's John Waller, and my number is 7051, and I'm looking for work.
We were just absolutely flabbergasted by the reaction that we got because we were being covered, because it was new. It's the first time it had ever been done in the entire whole United States. And so because of that, we were being covered.
I called to compliment you on what you're doing with regard to the local employment problem.
I have tape of us, our jobathon, being covered in Germany and Israel. I have tape of me with dubbed-in Japanese voice from Tokyo television. It was just phenomenal.
ジョバソンって知ってる？いやー、誰も知らないはずだよ。テレビをご覧のあなたはご存知ですか？
From a job crisis to the farm crisis, Channel 2 continued to respond to a public cry for help.
Don't talk about subsidizing the farmer. The man that printed the box made more than the man that grew the corn.
In February of 1986, Channel 2 invited the Phil Donahue Show to town for a town meeting on the plight of Midwest farmers.
Once again, you know, here was this little station in Cedar Rapids, Iowa that was doing some pretty big-time stuff.
We present Flood Day.
Some pretty big-time stuff is what Channel 2 continues to do. Throughout the years, we've gone the distance in public affairs programming helping people to help themselves.
Public affairs is something we put a lot of time and energy into, but for the most part, get nothing out of financially. Nonetheless, it's something that continues to be a part of what we do and who we are here at Channel 2.
Sandy, thank you. And we'll be right back.
Your instruments of yesterday, load and fire. Hear Johnny Eagle say you aim and fire. Never done forget Johnny Eagle. You get more with Johnny Eagle.
You can beat the heat. This is one way you can do it. Knoll Ridge Pool in Cedar Rapids. A lot of splashing going around there, and a lot of kids coming out of the water, largely.
Not long ago, a high school student asked me if I had always wanted to be in television from, say, the time I was her age. I had to think a minute, but then, of course, realized that when I was in high school in the mid-1940s, there was no television, at least not outside the laboratory. So what we have done here and what you have seen tonight represents 40 years of plowing new ground. Some things have worked, some haven't, as you have seen tonight. But we still have no model to follow, and we're drawing the map as we go along. Scientists keep developing new technologies and equipment, color, tape, microwaves, and the like, that enable us to do things that are sometimes unexpected. The real instruments of change in this television age are not those of us you see on camera. The ones who have changed the world are the engineers who have tied first our nation and now the entire world together with wires and satellites. Surely the pictures of affluence in the West made an impression on the impoverished people of the communist world and contributed to its collapse. Surely the images of freedom sparked hopes in China that will ultimately prevail. And surely the prospect of seeing a horrible war, live and in color, makes the prospect of such a war less likely. The world has become what McLuhan called the global village, in which no place is very far away. And like it or not, we are neighbors of most everyone. When I was the age of that high school girl and there was no television, I of course could never have foreseen what television would be today. Considering that we have gone through revolutionary changes about every decade, and that the rate of change seems to be accelerating, I can't even guess what television will be like 40 years from now. In just a moment, we'll take one step into Channel 2's future. But that's just a hint of what's to come. As to what else may happen, I can hardly wait.
Mommy, look out, Bill! Jimmy, please, not now. I'm too busy. Control yourself. Sure, you have a headache, tense, irritable, but don't take it out on him.
Had to share with things as we have.
Come on in, sit down.
Comes in. But it really was a great day.
Tonight we've showed you a lot of landmarks from the past. In a moment we'll enter a new era and pass what our successors will surely regard as another landmark, something they'll show on tape or whatever medium they are using 40 years from now. We hope you've enjoyed our remembrance of the past, and we think you will like the future even more. Thank you for being with us, and stay tuned.
Thank you.